Chapter 20. Balam Garden Battle. So, as it turned out, train stations were not at all happy to receive unscheduled, hijacked trains. No matter that Squall was able to prove he was a seed and it was an emergency, and they could therefore contact the garden later to deal with the backlash for it being in the station. Rinoa had been a bit embarrassed, but at least they were able to move on quickly. They ran through the town quickly, stopping only once. "Hey, Squall!" The guy from the junk shop called out to him as he was passing by. "That thing you ordered before you left? I had it delivered to your dorm, K." "Thank you," Squall called back to him as he continued moving. The other man found it a little rude, but he had never seen a seed running like that without good reason. Because it was faster, Squall rented them a car. Then he sped quickly down the road separating Balam from its garden. He frowned as he did so because the seeds that normally guarded the street were missing for some reason. That couldn't be good. Had the missiles already landed? He parked the car in front of the garden because he couldn't get in closer. The garden was still standing, but someone had blockaded the car entrance. "What's with that?" Zell frowned as they stepped out of the vehicle. "Let's go," Squall said, moving them forward. There was no missile damage at all as they stepped in closer to the open gates. "All right!" Zell cried out. "The garden's safe." "It looked like they did it," Rinoa smiled at Squall. "Yeah," he nodded then paused. "But the missiles could still be heading this way," he said, his honest realism setting in. "We have to report to the headmaster right away. Come on." Rinoa had only been here once. At night. During a formal event. The kind of thing that a place tended to clean itself up for so it looked good for guests. She only had that single night and Selfie's promise that it was a much different place from Galbadia Garden to know what to expect. Still. Is this normal?" Rinoa asked as the three of them walked down the entrance street. It looked like someone had kicked an anthill. Students and faculty were running around everywhere with a sense of panic and tense anger. They were being overseen by angry-looking garden clones that were yelling out over them. The one closest to the entrance could be heard clearer than any. "Find the headmaster!" he was ordering the students. Students that were almost exclusively cadets. Squall couldn't see a single seed among their number. What is going on? Were they evacuating? Did they somehow learn of the missile attack before their arrival? "Seize him!" the clone snarled angrily. "Kill him you have to! Go!" "What?" Squall and Zell shared a worried look. Rinoa was frowning because she knew that this was in no way normal. What was going on? Squall was looking around at the chaos as they ran further into the garden. There were so many students, not a single seed, running around. They were all calling out to each other loudly, searching for Headmaster Sid. Okay, there literally could not be a worse time for this. The three of them started closing in on the front gates. There, as though waiting for them, there was another clone standing around, barking orders at the scurrying cadets. They tried to run past him, but no such luck. Their attire, not in uniform, attracted the attention of the garden clone. He caught sight of them and charged. Squall frowned as the man came in closer, seething from under his hat. "You three!" he snapped. "What side are you on?" Squall frowned. What did that mean?
Answer the question,
he ordered, spittle flying. Or maybe it was lubricant from his robot parts. Honestly, Squall thought both were likely.
Are you with the Garden Master, or are you with Sid? I don't understand what you're talking about,
Squall said honestly, calmly.
Do you swear your allegiance to Garden Master Norg?
Did he swear his what to who? No. Just no. He wasn't swearing anything to anyone he didn't know. And he had so many more important things to worry about right now.
Can you tell me what's going on?
He asked instead of answering, just trying to get a sense of what he was walking into.
I'm the one asking questions. You're just supposed to follow orders.
Well, yeah. But not from him. Squall was supposed to obey his clients, his senior seeds, and Headmaster Sid. This guy was basically just a clerk. Squall wasn't obligated to obey him. Especially not when it came to swearing fealty to people he didn't know. He gave the clone a cold, dry look, one hand going to his gun blade hilt as he glared at him, resenting the implications of his outburst. He wouldn't draw the blade, of course. But it was comforting to hold in a way.
Hey! What kind of attitude is that?
The clone hissed.
You're with Sid, aren't you?
Honestly, if he was a representative of the other side, then yes. So much yes. The clone brought his fingers to his lips and let out an ear-piercing whistle. Squall frowned because he recognized that call from when he and the other trainees would be in the monster's lair and there would be no monsters around to fight. Movement from the bushes to the side alerted him that something was coming a moment before the caterpillar came slithering quickly out. The slow-moving grat following just after him, weaving its tentacles in the air, scenting their presence.
Norg is the true ruler of the garden.
The clone yelled at them before escaping. He might be able to summon the monsters, but that didn't mean he controlled them.
Great,
Squall sighed.
What's up with that?
Zell shook his head in disbelief.
We'll worry about it later. Zell, take out the caterpillar. On it. Rinoa, see those tentacles on the grat? Yeah. Use the Valkyrie and cut through them.
"'Kay," she nodded her head once, stepping forward. She unfolded her blade from the blaster and frowned at the state of the metal. It would still work, but she didn't like using a damaged weapon. She had no way of knowing when it might truly break. Well, it wasn't like she had a choice right now, and the edge was still sharp. She lifted it and fired. Her aim was perfect, slicing through the grat's flailing tentacles. It hissed as the remnants of the appendages crashed down.
Now aim for the roots,
Squall instructed, pointing. He had no doubts that she could handle this. The grats were the first monster that trainees learned to kill. She took aim a second time. The Valkyrie cut through the tops of its legs easily and the monster collapsed over. The gastric juices in its bell-shaped body spilled all over the ground, dissolving the outside of its own body that was unprotected against the harsh acid.
Perfect,
Squall nodded. Rinoa flushed in delight at the compliment.
Yeehaw!
Zell cried out, catching their attention. They looked over to see him riding the bucking caterpillar, one hand waving in the air as the other grasped the top of its head.
Zell!
Squall snapped, mildly annoyed.
Stop fooling around! We've got to find the headmaster. Right.
Fire encased his upheld fist and he brought it down. It broke through the caterpillar's head and the rancid smell of its burning bug guts filled the air. It crashed down, dead, and Zal jumped up with a victory smile. Squall didn't give him a chance to celebrate further. He was already running towards the gates, Rinoa hot on his tail.
Hey, wait up!
Zal chased after them. Past the gates and into the garden nexus, things were even more chaotic. It seemed that the bulk of the cadets were in here, all running around. It also looked like someone had managed to break open the doors of the training center and release the monsters into the garden proper. And, standing in front of the directory, VIII and ARandomAudiobookAppeared were frowning at the mess.
Hey!
ARandomAudiobookAppeared spotted them first and turned, pointing. VIII turned as well and frowned at them.
You guys are back. What's going on here?
Squall asked, hoping ARandomAudiobookAppeared would be more cooperative than the clone.
I dunno,
ARandomAudiobookAppeared shrugged, looking just as confused as Squall felt.
Me and VIII just got back from Galbadia this morning. At first, the faculty was saying something 'bout rounding up the seeds, you know? Now, everyone's either siding with the garden master or the headmaster. Fighting everywhere, you know.
Disturbing, VIII declared with calm, seething anger.
Disappointing for the disciplinary committee,
ARandomAudiobookAppeared agreed sadly.
All our hard work keeping peace around here for nothing, you know. Why are seeds being targeted?
Squall asked, frowning.
And where is the headmaster? Is he safe? We got no clue,
ARandomAudiobookAppeared shrugged.
We need to see him right away. It's important. Galbadian missiles may be heading this way right now. What?
ARandomAudiobookAppeared dropped back in surprise. He turned to VIII in a panic.
We gotta get outta here.
VIII was ruthless when she kicked him in the shin. ARandomAudiobookAppeared cried out, jumping in place.
Ouch! Geez, alright.
He groaned, rubbing the abused area. He turned to Squall, nodding once.
We'll warn everyone about the missiles. Man, this is no time to be fightin', you know.
Squall nodded.
Then we'll go look for the headmaster. Caution. Yeah,
ARandomAudiobookAppeared agreed.
The fightin' is intense everywhere. And watch out for those garden master goons, you know. They're calling the monsters on everyone that don't obey. Really just tryin' to intimidate everyone into following them, you know. Yo, guys,
Zal jerked his chin up at them.
Who you with? Headmaster or garden master?
Rinoa finished. ARandomAudiobookAppeared laughed at the choices.
Hey, you's like VIII always says, you know? We're with Cypher. Always have been, always will be.
Squall and Rinoa frowned at them as they ran off to hold up their end of the deal. She didn't know if she should tell them what he had done. Squall was wondering if they knew he had aligned himself with an evil sorceress. Would they be alright with that?
Come on,
Squall said, jerking his head to the left.
We'll start with Dr. Katawaki. If anyone is likely to know where he is, it's her.
Zal nodded and Rinoa fell into step beside him as he ran that way. They had to duck and dodge through various cadets and monsters along the way. With ARandomAudiobookAppeared's warning, it was easy to see how a great many of the cadets weren't just running, they were running scared. They were afraid of the monsters that the clones kept calling. Of course, no seed would be scared of that. Which explained why not a single seed had agreed to side with the garden master. They turned down the hall to the infirmary. But they found their way blocked by a garden clone who was flanked by 2 cadets. As they neared and slowed to a walk, they heard the clone chuckle darkly, facing towards the infirmary door.
Looks like Sid has some decent pawns.
2 seeds, both in full uniform, stepped forward, facing him with set jaws. One of them wielded a saber, the other a pair of nunchaku. They weren't afraid to face the oncoming trio. The clone growled in frustration.
This is getting nowhere. I'm calling in the monsters.
The cadets shrunk back, suddenly scared. They knew that the monsters might very well turn on them instead.
Let's get in there,
Squall said, pulling out his gunblade. His call caught the attention of the clone and the cadets. The threat of the monster had made the cadets jerk back. The sight of Squall made them cry outright in fear. Squall! One of the seeds yelled, a smile forming.
More seeds here,
the clone growled. He lifted his fingers to his lips and let out a long whistle. The quick fluttering of large insect wings alerted Squall about what kind of monster he had summoned. Laughing, the clone ran away, leaving the cadets behind to cower backwards away from the sound of the approaching monster.
What's that?
Zell frowned, not recognizing the sound of its flight.
It's a Granaldo,
Squall said just before the thing landed just outside of the hallway in the small courtyard spaces that surrounded the halls. Buzzing, it glared at them.
Ew,
Rinoa frowned at it.
I hate wasps. Do me a favor then, and shred its wings,
Squall said as it crawled towards the hall.
You got it.
The Valkyrie flew fast and true and sliced through not one, but both of the wings. The surprisingly heavy appendages crashed down to the dirt and the Granaldo roared in fury. Its front limb, sharp as a spear, shot out. Rinoa jumped out of the way. The cadet beside her did not. He caught the full force of it in the shoulder. Screaming in pain, he was dropped down. One of the seeds jumped forward and sliced through the limb. The cadet sank down against the wall, reaching for his shoulder where the bug arm remained. Zell's eyes burned as he reached for his GF.
Hellfire!
The blazing attack fell down against the bug and burned it up easily. Squall was grateful that Rinoa and Zell were willing to step up and do so much fighting. Despite his brief nap, in Rinoa's very comfortable lap, he was still injured and exhausted. As the carcass of the Granaldo hit the ground, Dr. Katawaki herself stepped out of the infirmary. Drawn by the pained cries of the downed cadet, she walked past her guardian seeds as they put their weapons away and kneeled down at his side. She frowned at the damage.
Oh, my! Can you stand up?
The cadet, grimacing in pain, stared at her in confusion.
Why are you helping me? I'm with the garden master.
Dr. Katawaki tisked through her teeth.
Do stop being ridiculous. I don't care whose side you're on. You're injured and I'm a doctor. It's as simple as that. We need to take care of those wounds now, you hear?
As she stood up, she caught sight of Squall sliding his gunblade painfully back in the sheath. She had been watching him too long to not recognize when he was injured. She frowned at him as well because, even just at a glance, she could tell something was really wrong.
Squall, don't just stand there,
she told him, looking at the cadet.
Give me a hand. Zell, you too. Yes, ma'am,
Zell grinned as the two of them stepped forward. Working together, with Rinoa stepping forward to hold open the door, Squall and Zell half carried the cadet into the infirmary. They laid him down in the first bed and stepped back. Dr. Katawaki looked him over for a second before moving closer to Squall.
What's with all this faction mumbo-jumbo? It's just ridiculous.
Dr. Katawaki, Squall started. She cut him off neatly as she walked over to her desk.
And you? Are you out of cure spells or something, Squall? Haven't I told you to always keep those in stock? Well, yes, but you said yourself that cure spells can't fix broken bones,
Squall frowned. At this point, he was almost out anyway. They were pretty much just weak painkillers.
Oh, dear.
Dr. Katawaki sighed as she reached into the top drawer. She pulled 4 capsules out.
I don't know what I'm going to do with you, boy. You're right, of course. Come here. I'll use one of my Curaga spells on you.
Unspeakably grateful, Squall followed her into the next room. As Katawaki inspected the damage and clicked her tongue over it, Rinoa was standing beside Zell and looking around curiously.
She seems nice,
she said smiling.
Oh, yeah. The doc's the best.
Zell nodded.
So what was up with that reaction back there?
Rinoa jerked her head to the entrance.
Reaction?
Zell frowned, not understanding.
To Squall. The others seemed to know him really well. Oh, yeah. Obviously. That stupid cadet was right to be scared of him. If Squall had fought him, even injured, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Everyone knows how good Squall is around here. So he's popular?
Rinoa asked, shifting on her feet.
I wouldn't say popular so much. More like he's famous. Everyone knows how good Squall is. I bet he coulda made seed at 15 if he hadn't picked up his gunblade. And even then, man is he great. Did you know, he's the only gunblade specialist seed? Really?
Rinoa's face brightened. Why did that make her feel so proud?
Absolutely. He's the next level. And he's dedicated. And helpful. They say that just being in the same class as him can make your grades go up. He's always willing to help people learn and study if they need it. Apparently, all you have to do is ask. Yeah, I bet,
Rinoa smiled, thinking about her own situation.
In fact,
Zell continued.
There's this legend of this girl. They say she was the worst in her class until she asked Squall to teach her how to study. They say he spent 2 weeks helping her hone her study technique and now she's the top student in the medic program. What? No way. Zell, stop exaggerating,
Squall frowned at him as he and Katawaki walked back in. He wasn't nearly so stiff anymore. He was still tired, but he finally wasn't in any pain. Honestly, that was more than enough for him. He rubbed his no longer pained wrists gratefully as he stepped back towards them.
Ah,
Rinoa looked a bit downcast.
You mean it isn't true? Of course it's not true. I only helped her for 1 week, not 2. And she's top 10%, not the top. And I would appreciate it if people would stop spreading rumors of my life.
Rinoa couldn't help it, she started laughing.
Squall's so modest,
Katawaki grinned as she picked up the other 3 capsules she had pulled from her desk. The 4th, the one that had contained a single Curaga spell, she put back with the other empty capsules.
Here, dears. What is it?
Squall asked, taking one from her. Rinoa and Zell followed suit.
Those are Cura spells. I should have known better than to think that you would be able to keep yourself out of trouble, boy. You just can't resist, can you? I can't run away,
Squall said, immediately making her grin.
Tough guy, hey? I think I'd be disappointed if you had said otherwise. Take those with my blessings. You're going to need them around here. Drive Katawaki, do you know where the headmaster is?
Squall asked, breaking the capsule open and letting Shiva take the magic eagerly.
You're looking for Sid.
She blinked.
Well, as you can see, he's not here. Do you have any ideas?
The doctor put her hand to her chin as she thought.
Sue would probably know. She's been coordinating the seeds around here since everything started. I have no idea where she might be though. She's not the kind to stay in one place long. Why are you looking for him anyway? I think you can put off giving him a report from your first mission considering everything. No, that's not it.
Squall leaned over her desk as she took a seat.
Listen to me. Galbadia might have launched missiles against the garden. We've already taken steps to try to stop them, but we have no way of knowing if they worked. You should evacuate immediately, drive Katawaki. Are you serious?
The older woman jumped up, surprised. Then she nodded once, accepting what he said as truth and sat right back down.
Then I'm definitely gonna have to stay. Wah. But... Listen here, boy, no one moves me when I don't want to go. And if someone gets hurt, who's gonna look after them? And if you die in from the missile attack?
He returned dryly.
Don't sass me, child.
She pointed at him, making him step off.
I'm staying and that's all there is to it. Now you get going and look for Sid. Those boys out there are watching over me. I'll be fine.
Squall sighed but nodded, accepting her decision. Drive Katawaki was going over to look at the injured cadet as they left the room. Rinoa smiled at the elder woman, then to Squall.
What?
He asked when he saw her grin.
Nothing,
she said, shaking her head. It was so different. Seeing Squall in a place where he was surrounded by people who knew him. She found herself wanting to see more. The two seeds outside turned as they came out.
Thanks for the help, Squall,
one said, waving at him.
Hey, Squall,
the other waved like they were friends. He frowned at the blank look Squall gave him in return.
What? Don't you remember me? It's me, Nita. We earn seed together. Oh, yeah.
Squall said slowly, trying to remember. Was it him? Hey. Nita sighed, slumping over.
Well, that's just like you not to remember. Whatever. Anyway, thanks for helping out. We're fine here though. You can get going if you need to.
Squall nodded to him and made his way back to the Nexus. He tried not to sigh as he looked out over the chaos that was the garden.
So, now what?
Zell asked.
I guess we just work our way around,
Squall said, for want of a better plan. He looked over to the next walkway that led to the quad. He didn't really want to, but apparently process of elimination was the only way to get what he wanted. It was a huge waste of time, but he was wasting even more by just standing here.
Let's go,
he said, turning to run to the next area. The quad, a very peaceful, pretty sort of place, had no one guarding the hall there. They started down the L-shaped stairs towards the bottom. That's when they heard the plaintive cry of one of the garden clones.
Damn it! We need reinforcements.
Squall came to a stop to see the clone running up the stairs. He was breathing hard and clutching an arm that was either bleeding or leaking oil. It was hard to tell because of the dark maroon color of his billowing sleeves. He caught sight of them and growled.
More of Sid's followers? Die!
He let out a piercing whistle and Squall grinned. Just their bad luck that Squall had stopped by the infirmary first. He was far more battle-ready now. Down from the sky, lured by the whistle, a bomb streaked down out of the sky. Hot on its tail was one of the blue-skinned, floating glacial eye monsters. Two beasts with opposing affinities. Squall would have some difficulty killing the glacial eye since they both utilized ice for their powers. The bomb, however, was an easy monster. Grinning, almost eager to put his healed body to use, Squall stepped ahead of Rinoa and Zell. The bomb was the faster of the two monsters and it was charging at Squall with a wicked grin on its ugly, circular face. Squall stood in place, waiting. Slice. The bomb's pieces, cut clean in half, separated to either side of him. His blade, quickly drawn from the sheath, gleamed in the light of the quad as Squall gently brought it down against his shoulder as the remains of the bomb crashed against the ground far on either side of him. Rinoa let out a breath at the sight he made. Damn, she forgot how sexy he was when he moved like that.
Rinoa,
he turned to her.
Take out the glacial eye. Sure.
She shook her head to remove those thoughts. Time and place, girl, she told herself firmly as she stepped up to fight the slower-moving, blue-skinned monster. Wiry and slow, it proved easy prey for Rinoa. She cut it clean in half and, as it was falling, Zell lit the pieces on fire for good measure.
You know, we don't even have those in the training center,
Zell frowned at the monster pieces.
Did they really just let monsters come inside? This is going to suck to clean up,
Rinoa sighed. Squall moved forward, deeper down into the quad. Down where there was a half-finished stage that Squall was rather sure Selfie had begun setting up for the garden festival. As they approached, looking around for the headmaster, or for whatever had made the clone run, 3 seeds dropped down from above.
Who's there?
One guy asked, landing in an attack position. His eyes widened, then narrowed.
Is that you, Squall? Whose side are you on? I'm with the headmaster,
Squall said easily. At this point, it was whatever. The guy let out a sigh of relief as he and the other 2 seats relaxed.
Phew, good. Because I definitely don't want to fight you.
He laughed sheepishly with the others, shaking his head.
Who's this garden master anyway? I've never heard of him. Have any of you seen the headmaster?
They each shook their heads.
Where is everyone?
Zell asked, looking around.
There's usually a lot more seeds around than this. Yeah, there were more of us here, but Headmaster Sid ordered most of us evacuate. He said something like the true battle for seed is yet to come or something.
Squall frowned.
What does that mean?
He shrugged.
No idea. We didn't have much time to ask either. Things had gotten pretty crazy by that point. Most of us obeyed, but there were a few who stayed. Sue is with us. We're gonna hold up here a bit longer,
the girl on the end said.
Even if the headmaster punishes us for our disobedience, we don't care. We're loyal and we won't abandon him.
Zell grinned, nodding along. Squall nodded once, accepting that before turning. Rinoa smiled at them before following after Squall. It was nice to see that Squall wasn't the only intense seed. It was actually kind of pleasant to see the loyalty that drove them to stay. and that some of them at least were willing to disobey direct orders if they believed it was for the best. At least the garden didn't encourage mindlessness. Continuing in the circle of the nexus, the three of them moved on to the cafeteria next door. There was another clone there. Like the last one, he summoned a bomb. But that was all.
"Stall them!"
he yelled, like he could command it, running away from the monster at the same time.
"Blizzard!"
Squall's spell destroyed the bomb so easily that it made Rinoa laugh.
"That worked out well for him,"
Zell laughed with her. It hadn't even stalled them for a second. They continued on into the cafeteria. It was there that they found the first cadets that hadn't been threatened into joining the garden master. Two girls, seed trainees if Squall wasn't wrong, were standing over near the counter. Two seeds were there as well. The seed girl let out a breath and grinned at seeing Squall walk in.
"Thanks for the backup,"
she nodded to him.
"The headmaster?"
Squall asked, getting right to the point.
"He isn't here. We're gathering here to make them think he is though. Downside, they're trying really hard to break in. Oh, but don't worry about us. We're doing fine. If they attacked us all at once, we couldn't hold them off even if we are seed."
The seed guy grimaced, rubbing his sore shoulder.
"But we've got others doing the same thing all over the garden,"
the girl continued, grinning.
"We're thinning them out. Essentially, bottlenecking them so none of us have to take them all on. Brilliant idea, hey? Wasn't ours though." "Then who thought of it?"
Squall asked, pretty sure he already knew.
"Sue," the guy grinned. "She took over when this whole thing began."
She grinned and put her hands to her hips.
"You going looking for him? Well, you tell those traitors to bring it on, Squall. We can take him."
Rinoa grinned. Such confidence. Was it a seed thing?
"Hey, you guys hungry?"
one of the cadets near the counter asked.
"You want some hot dogs?" "Yes!"
Zell cried, immediately making Rinoa and the other seeds jump.
"Yes, please!"
The girl laughed and turned to her friend.
"Hey, get them some of those leftover hot dogs!" "Hey!"
The other girl frowned.
We finished those off already."
Zell cried out in despair as the first girl grimaced apologetically.
"Sorry."
Zell sighed, slumping over.
"We've got some of the other nutritious stuff,"
she said, making a face at the thought.
"It's really good for you. Good for energy."
Squall said that would be fine and asked for some energy bars. They needed something. It had been a while since they had eaten anything. He finished his off quickly. Zell was nearly in tears over his but ate it. Rinoa looked at hers, took a bite, then gagged.
"Gross."
She shook her head, swallowing quickly because she didn't want to spit it out in a very unladylike fashion right in front of Squall.
"Eat it,"
he ordered.
"You haven't eaten in as long as we have. It doesn't taste good, but it's got all the essential vitamins, minerals, and energy that you need." "Yeah, but it tastes like thrusty meat. That's gone bad."
She sighed. But, knowing he was right, she forced herself to eat it quickly. At least the girls also had plenty of water that they could use the wash down they. Healthy food. After the very brief food break, the three of them continued. Healed, now having eaten and had something to drink, they were in far better shape than when they had gotten here. The dormitories were being guarded by a single clone. They had apparently taken over this area because no seed had tried to keep it from them. Squall approached him and he growled.
More of Sid's followers? Die!
He whistled loudly, then ran away as a caterpillar crawled out from the dorm halls. Squall dispatched of it quickly and left its carcass against the stairs.
This is getting old fast,
he said, flicking bug guts off of his blade. He looked over and ran quickly back into the dorms. Rinoa followed him. They split off at one point and Zell ran into his room. Right across the hall from Squall's. She looked between them before walking into Squall's dorm. Zell's room was surprisingly tidy. Squall's room was sparsely decorated and without any personal items aside from his gun blade case. Honestly, it was exactly what she would have expected from him. Squall opened a drawer on his desk and pulled out some spare ammo. He had lost his in the prison and had been resorting to only using his blade. He stocked up quickly before standing and leaving. Almost sad to lose her chance to see more, Rinoa backed up and met up with Zell in the hall. Squall frowned to see him munching on a bag of chips.
What's that?
He asked, pointing.
Emergency stores. Want some?
No. Squall turned and ran away. Zell finished the bag rather quickly and tossed it into a recycle bin that they passed, working their way to the next area. He was still licking the salt off of his fingers as the three of them turned into the hall leading to the garage. Of course, they found their way blocked by a garden clone trying to break his way in.
More of Sid's followers,
he growled.
Die! That is getting old,
Rinoa frowned as he whistled.
The clones don't know how to be original,
Squall said, trying to flick more bug guts off of his gun blade.
Clones,
Rinoa repeated as the faculty member ran away from the monster he had summoned, yelling out over his shoulder,
"This garden belongs to Norg."
Squall cursed internally as he realized he had accidentally referred to the clone by his own private joke for the members. And to Rinoa. He knew better than to think that she would drop it.
Yeah, clones,
he nodded, lowering his blade.
You notice that they all talk alike and that you never see their face? So they must either be clones or robot clones. I'm not willing to discount the latter. They're a little too in sync to even be clones.
Squall, Rinoa breathed in awe, her eyes wide.
You're making a joke?
Squall frowned.
You don't have to be so surprised. No, I really think I do.
Guys, Zell spoke up, pointing.
Not to interrupt, but he summoned a Grendel. There aren't even Grendels in this region. Where did he even find that?
Squall turned and brought up his gun blade in time to catch the Grendel's shinning tail against the edge as it charged. It growled as Squall threw it back.
Demi!
Rinoa yelled, throwing out a spell. The gravity-based spell was devastating against the heavily armored dragon-style Grendel. Zell jumped forward as the spell faded away and slipped his arm around its neck. He threw his body around it, twisting its neck and snapping its spine. He landed on its other side as its body dropped and Zell dusted off his hands.
Chips made my grip greasy. You chose to eat them,
Squall said, walking forward past the monster's body and into the garage. He gasped to see the headmaster standing there alongside two seeds. He found him.
Sir.
He ran forward. He slid to a halt as the headmaster started winking in and out of existence. He frowned in confusion as he faded away. The seats behind him grinned.
It was just a hologram,
one of them said proudly, holding up a small hologram projector.
Made it myself using photos I scanned of him. Pretty cool, hey.
Squall sighed shortly, somehow angry.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Leaving it at that, Squall turned to leave. He just couldn't even.
What a letdown,
Zell grumbled as they walked away.
I actually thought it was him. Seeds are pretty smart,
Rinoa admired. She couldn't imagine trying to program a hologram projector. Those were very high-tech machines.
A little too smart,
Squall grumbled. He had actually thought he had found the headmaster. They moved on to the training center. Squall was fully prepared for the monster population to be thicker around here, but he was surprised to find it wasn't. Most of the monsters must have escaped and quickly abandoned the place they had been caged for so long. As they ran down the hall, they could hear a garden clone, and Rinoa couldn't help but think of him as a clone now, calling out.
Where did she go? Over here. She's one of the headmaster's seeds.
Another cadet called out after him.
She's got the junior classmen with her. Don't let them escape.
In the front area of the training center, before the resealed metal doors closing off the monster lair, a young female seed was breathing hard, dagger in hand, as she moved the underclassmen that she had with her forward. They hit the electric fence and had nowhere to go. She turned quickly and saw the two cadets and the garden clone approaching her.
Oh, shoot!
She grimaced, lifting her blade with a wince. She was already injured.
I'm sorry,
she said to the kids with her. The young boy, who was probably only a year or two out from being a cadet himself, growled as he took a fighting stance.
I'm gonna fight, too.
One of the cadets saw him and found himself laughing.
This should be interesting.
He stepped forward, smirking the entire time. The little boy was growling at him, his fists trembling with a mixture of anger and strength he was building up. As the cadet got in closer, the kid struck like a cobra. His foot came out and slammed against the cadet's kneecap. Crying out in pain, the cadet dropped down, reaching for the injured patella with shaking hands. Grinning, totally smug, the boy put his hands to his fist as the female seed smiled at him, proud.
I'm not training every day for nothing,
the boy told him.
Bring it on.
Rinoa was giggling into her hand.
You guys start early here, don't you?
She looked to her side, but Squall was gone.
Hey! Squall? Where are you? Why you little?
The seed snarled. He stood up, his hands reaching out for the little boy's neck with an ugly snarl on his face. Squall struck from above, slicing his blade down across the man's chest. A long laceration, spitting blood, appeared from his shoulder all the way to his hip. Squall stood up straight, flicking the blood from his gunblade and fixed him with a cold stare.
You'll have to get past me first,
he growled threateningly.
Another one of Sid's followers.
The clone growled as the cadet fell back, clutching his bleeding torso.
Die!
Squall finished for him. The clone sputtered for a second, glaring at him from under his hat.
Why you insolent?
Unable to find anything to say, he lifted his fingers and let out a whistle that shrieked through the air of the training center. Squall was cool and calm as the clone snarled.
Those opposed to Norg must die.
He turned tail and ran, the uninjured cadet helping the one Squall had nearly cut in half run back through the front entryway. Squall, the female seed breathed his name in relief. The ground rumbled underneath his feet as a loud, dull sound echoed through the air.
What was that?
Rinoa asked, turning around.
Oh, Hein.
Squall sighed.
You better get those two back. Right.
The seed, recognizing the large footsteps as well, took the hands of the two children and pulled them backwards and away from Squall. He stepped forward and stood beside Rinoa.
What's going on?
She asked, a bit worried.
Got any sleep spells? Yeah. Put them on your blade. Immediately. Oh. Okay. Diablos.
Her GF obeyed. The footsteps were getting louder. Zell growled as he tightened his gloves.
It's coming.
Thud. 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 The air shook with a loud, strangely pitched roar. The door on the other side of the training center, the one that hadn't been resealed shut since the monsters were released, burst outward as the large, red and black T-Rexor slammed its large head through. Rinoa screamed as Squall's hand tightened on his gun blade.
Put it to sleep,
Squall said to her aside as the T-Rexor scented the air around them.
If that thing gets you in its jaws, you'll be dead and swallowed before we can react. Right?
Rinoa said, trying not to shake as she lifted her arm. T-Rexors were renowned for being hard to defeat. For being manslayers. They were one of the few monster species that had been deliberately hunted with the express purpose of making them extinct, specifically because they were so very deadly. The only good thing about them was they did not breed easily or quickly.
Wait for it.
Zell mumbled as it came in closer.
What is it even doing here?
Rinoa hissed, scared.
We use them in training, of course,
Squall said calmly as he watched it. The enormous beast, at least twice his height, was watching them as it moved deceptively slowly forward.
What could you possibly use a T-Rexor in training for? Teamwork training. Taking on a T-Rexor alone is foolhardy even for experienced seeds. However, if you take it on in a group, you'll find it's a much easier opponent to defeat. You just have to be careful. They move slowly in the beginning. But, whenever they feel like it's right.
The beast's eyes flashed just before it dropped its head and charged. Rinoa cried out and threw herself to the side. Zell's side flipped out of the way. Squall ran directly forward. At the last second, he jumped up and landed on the monster's head. Slicing down at its back in short, horizontal lines through the spaces in its vertebrae as he went, he ran down its spine and jumped from its tail. He rolled in the air and landed facing the monster again. His blade had barely scratched through its thick hide.
Hellfire!
Zell roared, bringing down a flaming ball of earth and magma onto its head. The dinosaur roared its pain but didn't fall down.
Rinoa! Shoot it!
Squall yelled.
Are you kidding me?
She got to her feet, turning back. The three of them had formed a triangle around it and she couldn't help but feel hers with the weakest link.
What can my tiny little blaster possibly do against that thing? You put the sleep spell on it, right? Well, yeah, but... Shoot!
Its attention caught by her yelling, the T-Rexor turned to her. Growling, it charged. Rinoa screamed and hit the fire button on her blaster, closing her eyes in fear. She couldn't say her Valkyrie even nicked it. Its thick hide could withstand the force of Squall's blows, hers were like a feather duster caressing its skin. The sleep spell attached to the blade, however, soaked into its skin easily and without any resistance. It went to work immediately and the large, growling monster, swayed in place slightly before its body dropped. It slid to a stop nearly at her feet, coming to a rest right in front of her. Breathing deeply, it growled even in sleep.
What they?
Rinoa frowned as she caught her Valkyrie again.
T-Rexors are very susceptible to magic,
Squall explained to her over its downed body.
If it starts coming to, hit it again. Until then.
Squall reached into his mind and grabbed for Shiva's power.
Diamond dust.
Rinoa's breath escaped her in amazement as the GF's magic shattered against the monster's skin. It didn't flinch, it didn't even wake up, but scratches opened up all over its body from the splintering ice all around and through it.
Hellfire!
Zell yelled again, throwing more burning magma on its body. It burned it, but the T-Rexor still remained asleep.
Okay, I know what I'm doing the next time I have a bout of insomnia,
Rinoa said, admiring the strength of the spell.
Alright, Diablos. Time to pull our own weight. Dark Messenger.
She heard the massive crunch of enormous bones breaking under the weight of Diablos's gravity-based magic. The T-Rexor stirred, but still didn't awaken.
Blizzara!
Squall speared it with magic. Nothing.
Fire!
Zell burned it immediately afterwards, heat shocking its cells. Fast asleep. Rinoa was about to throw her own demi-spell on top of theirs. As she lifted her hand to release the energy, she accidentally smacked her finger against the release trigger on her Valkyrie. The weapon, ever obedient, shot forward and hit the monster's head. Barely even a scratch. It probably wouldn't have scratched at all if she hadn't hit it near the softer skin around its eyes. Eyes that immediately snapped open, its pupil constricting on her. She barely had time to even question how that tiny thing, out of everything else, could possibly wake the monster up. Using its large back feet, it launched itself towards her.
Rinoa!
Zell yelled. Screaming, Rinoa froze. Diablos did not. Gravity suddenly increased around her so violently that her body slammed to the ground. The breath rushed out of her lungs. The T-Rexor's teeth snapped in the air right above her body. Growling, it pushed itself up and snarled down at her. Rinoa, shaking, tried to push herself backwards and away from it, even as she knew there was no way she was getting away in time. The T-Rexor reared up to bite down. Rinoa clenched her eyes closed, screaming out for Squall. The loud clanging of bone on metal rang through her ears. Squall's grunt of effort had her peeking through tightly closed eyelids. He was standing over her, the cold air around him washing over her comfortingly. One hand on the hilt of his gun, the other holding the flat edge of the blade. He was pushing up against the T-Rexor's jaw, against its teeth, using only his own strength. It wasn't without effort. He was shaking, his knees bending as he resisted the force pressing down against him.
Squall!
Rinoa breathed, pushing herself up.
What are you doing?
He snapped.
Get out of the way. Right.
Coming back to herself, Rinoa scrambled to get up and move. She ran a few feet before turning and looking back. The image Squall made squaring off against the T-Rexor, muscle to muscle, was even more impressive when she stood back and looked at it in all its glory.
Hold it still, Squall!
Zell yelled, charging in from behind. With a wild cry, he jumped clear over Squall's head and slammed his fist against the monster's exposed teeth. The loud cracking of bone made Rinoa flinch. The monster roared in pain and reared back. Two of its top teeth, broken clean through by Zell's punch, fell and hit the ground.
Woo!
Zell hollered, landing and rolling away. Rinoa recalled her Valkyrie and aimed it again. She needn't have bothered. Reared up like that, the softer skin at the monster's neck was exposed. Squall ran forward and used Zell's back as a springboard to jump up. He sliced across in a wide arc and cut clean through the monster's jugular. Blood burst forward, then almost immediately froze from the ice Squall had covering his blade. Ice that, now with something to catch, spread into its body. Squall landed neatly as the T-Rexor fell backwards. Its body crashed against the floor and remained still. Rinoa was breathing hard as Squall stood up straight. The blood on his gun blade had frozen over and, with a sharp whip of the blade, he shattered it and sent it falling.
Well, that happened,
Zell grinned.
I think that's a new record. Who timed it?
Squall sheathed his blade and walked over to her quickly.
Are you hurt? No. Good. Never shoot a beast that has been put to sleep. Magic only. Magic will not awaken them, but a physical attack will. It's a very picky sort of spell. I'm sorry. It was an accident.
She frowned, feeling bad.
I'm not angry. I'm warning you. Do you understand? Yeah. Sorry.
He nodded and turned to where the other seed was pulling the underclassmen forward away from the closed door.
You three all right?
He asked. She nodded, smiling at him.
Thanks, Squall. I owe you big time for that one. Thanks, Squall,
the little girl smiled at him shyly.
I coulda taken him.
The seed squeezed the little boy's hand warningly.
I mean, thanks.
Squall waved away their gratitude, he didn't need it, and turned to leave. Rinoa let out a long breath, staring at the T-Rexor before running after them. Just a few short weeks ago, she never would have believed herself capable of fighting one. And, even if she had done very little, she had still been there. She had still contributed. Oh, if only her father could see her now. She hoped it stuck directly in his craw.
Guess that just leaves the library,
Zell said as they left that area.
There's no way he's hidden here. Sue definitely wouldn't risk his life in the training center. Agreed,
Squall nodded.
Let's move quickly. I don't know how much time we have left.
The library, the last spoke on the wheel of the Nexus, was guarded by, surprise, another clone. He was growling in anger.
What's taking so long? Hurry up!
The sound of their footsteps as they walked over made him turn. He could probably tell by the expressions on their faces that they weren't his allies. And all three of them were so done with the crap pulled by the clones.
More of Sid's followers. Die.
Squall, Rinoa, and Zell all finished for him. He hesitated awkwardly. They stared at him. Growling in rage, he lifted his fingers to his mouth and let out a long whistle. The grat that emerged from the bushes around the library seemed laughable after the T-Rexor.
Ha ha!
The clone laughed at them.
Face the wrath of this monster!
Rinoa's Valkyrie sliced through its tentacles as it shot out, then ripped through its body as it came back. The monster was collapsing in death before the clone finished speaking. She caught the edge easily, and Squall's eyebrow raised at the suddenly still clone.
Anything else?
He asked calmly. The clone sputtered, then brought his fingers up to whistle again. Nothing happened. There were no monsters left in the area to call.
Curse you, seeds!
The clone sputtered as he ran past them. Squall let him go. He could have killed him, but that would have ruined the robot/human mystery. And he felt like he needed to leave some mystery in his life. Rinoa was laughing as Zell stuck his tongue out at the retreating clone. Squall continued into the library by himself. A seed there nodded at him in greeting.
Hey, thanks for the backup, Squall. Is the headmaster here?
Please, say yes.
Nope, definitely not here.
The other seed shook his head. Squall let out a long sigh as two of the cadets came forward from the back.
Hey, Squall.
One of them, Squall was pretty sure he was from his old class, waved.
Check it out. I joined the headmaster's side. Of course. They can't bully me into joining. I know my precious instructor Treep wouldn't dare join their side.
Oh, right. That's how Squall knew him. He was in Quistis's fan club. He still couldn't believe she had a fan club.
He in here, Squall?
Zell asked, walking into the library.
Zell.
The two of them turned to see the library worker girl in cadet uniform flushing bright red.
Oh, hey there,
Zell waved at her.
You're back,
she breathed.
My first mission was pretty great. Well, except all the bad parts. I can't wait to hear about it,
she laughed breathlessly.
Oh.
Reaching into her pocket, she ran forward and placed something into his hands.
Here. For you. Thanks so much for helping save us. Come on, Zell,
Squall said, walking past him.
Guess we have to start checking the second floor.
Seriously? How hard could it be to find one person? The entire garden was looking for him. Rinoa looked up from the monster carcass. She was bent over. She had been drawing sleep spells to replace those she had just used from its body before it all escaped.
Was he there?
She asked without any real hope.
Nope. But check it out.
Zell held up his prize.
I got an X potion. This baby is supposed to be super effective. Almost like a bottled Curaga spell. Jealous, Squall?
So jealous, Squall said immediately, totally deadpan. Mostly to shut him up. Rinoa was laughing at him again.
Come on. We still have a lot of garden to cover.
They did not have time for this. This kind of thing could not come at a worse time. Squall seriously hoped that the headmaster was hidden in one of the second-story rooms. He didn't want to think of the consequences if Selfie and the others had failed and he couldn't find him in time. The dark flash of a siege uniform was eye-catching specifically because Squall hadn't seen it out here recently. All of the seats had been spread out, holed up. Except the one that was starting up the stairs of the dais the elevator came to rest on. Brown hair cut into a bob. Quick, efficient moves. A deceptively normal-looking body.
Sue!
Squall exclaimed, pointing to her. He put more speed in his legs, but he still wasn't fast enough to catch up to her before the elevator doors closed around her. Cursing, he hit the call button, but it was too late. He stood back to watch where the elevator would go, grateful the shaft that housed it was tinted clear blue.
"The second floor,"
Zell said. Squall nodded and waited for it to come back down. The three of them rushed inside and hit the button for the second floor. The elevator was quick and still too slow for Squall's liking. When they reached the landing, Sue was nowhere in sight. However, as they ran forward, Squall could see her disappearing around the corner towards the emergency exit on the second floor. He ran after her, calling out for her to stop. Sue, who had been going to see if the emergency exit could act as a plausible escape route, skidded to a halt at hearing her name called. Immediately, she went on the defensive as she turned back. She carried no weapon with her, but that meant nothing. One didn't become the top seed because they allowed themselves to be defenseless.
"Whose side are you on?"
she demanded to know immediately.
"Neither,"
Squall snapped, tired of these games.
"We're just back from assignment and we have to see the headmaster now. It's urgent. Where is he?"
Coming from anyone but the forever serious Squall, Sue would have dismissed the inquiry outright as being a thin attempt to find the hidden headmaster. But, since it was Squall, she was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. She relaxed from her pose, clutching her hands before her, and gave him a cool look down the length of her nose.
"Okay. I'm listening. Galbadian missiles may be heading this way." "Here,"
Sue gasped. Coming from anyone but Squall, that warning would have prompted more questions. It would have sparked disbelief and distrust that this was a ploy. But Squall would never lie about this, and he was clearly agitated. Something Squall only became when it was serious. She composed herself quickly.
"All right. I'll inform him right away." "Where is he?"
Squall asked, needing to know. Sue grinned.
"In his office. We made it look like he's gone into hiding so no one will check there. But he never left. He's been there all along. Come on. I'll fill him in."
Sue was faster than Squall was. By a lot. It actually surprised him how quick she was. By the time he reached the elevator, she had already ridden it up and it was opening back on the second story, waiting for him. The others climbed inside and followed her to the third floor. The doors opened and Sue was coming back out of the double-door entrance of the office.
"He's waiting for you,"
she said, gesturing over her shoulder.
"I'm going to go tell everyone to evacuate."
Squall nodded and ran forward past her. Kindly Headmaster Sid looked unspeakably sad as he gently touched the plexiglass walls that had been painstakingly and beautifully inscribed with swirling lines on one side of the office.
"Sir,"
Squall and Zell immediately snapped to attention before him, giving him respectful salutes. From behind them, Renoa waved brightly. Sid nodded, accepting all three greetings as he held his hands behind his back.
"Sue has told me about the missiles. Unfortunately, the faculty has disabled two intercoms so we can't announce the evacuation. I've ordered Sue to do that herself."
Squall nodded.
"We met Rajan and Fujin down below. They're already doing that, but I don't know how effective they are. No one seems to be listening. They're all too focused on fighting,"
Zell agreed, frowning.
"I want you to assist them,"
the headmaster ordered.
"Then evacuate yourselves."
Squall blinked at the order. And it was unmistakably an order. One he absolutely did not want to obey at this moment. He cast his mind around quickly for some excuse that he could give for ignoring it and remaining here.
But I have a lot to report.
The headmaster shook his head.
You can tell me later.
Squall frowned at the tone of his voice. It wasn't exactly encouraging. It almost sounded final. The look on the headmaster's face was sad. Distant. Not unlike what Squall imagined a ship captain would look like standing at the controls of a rapidly sinking ship. He was not thinking of dying here, was he? Absolutely not. As a seed, Squall could not allow for the death of their headmaster. He could not accept the demise of the man that knew every single student in his garden by name, specialty, and personality. The man who commanded a group of mercenaries with kindness and smiles. Squall would knock him out and carry him over his shoulder by force from the garden if he had to. Some of that must have shown on Squall's face because the headmaster tilted his head at him curiously.
Do you have a problem with that?
He asked calmly. Yes. He did. Oh, so many problems with that. He settled for voicing the simplest, least disrespectful of them.
Sir, what is it exactly that you are going to do here? I'm going to stay,
he said immediately, lifting his head,
and see this to the end. After all, this place is my home. You're planning on dying here?
Zell yelled.
No.
Rinoa reached out for him.
You can't. Just come with us, please. You can always rebuild this place. It's not worth it.
The headmaster chuckled at their collective reactions.
Calm yourselves. You can rest assured, I'm not suicidal, nor am I so noble that I'll stay with a doomed building when I don't have to. I am just going to try something. There may still be a way to save the garden.
Sid gave them a salute. An unpolished, awkward salute that was nowhere near the standard that was expected of the students. Then he smiled and began walking away. He got maybe 2 steps. Then his bum knee collapsed out from under him and sent him falling. Squall face-palmed at the sight. Laughing sheepishly, Sid forced himself up as quickly as his aged body would allow.
I think I'm too old for this kind thing. Sir,
Squall stepped forward immediately.
I'd like to handle whatever it is that you're planning.
Sid looked over to him, his eyes watchful and dissecting. He didn't immediately jump on the chance as Squall would have expected. He just continued looking at Squall like he was a puzzle that needed to be worked out.
Really? And why is that?
Squall started at the question. What kind of thing was that to say right now? He didn't know. Because the aged headmaster might screw up. Because he wanted to do more than just announce the evacuation order. Because this wasn't just a building. Because he wanted to know his plan. Because this was his home too. He had too many reasons. He didn't know. Who cared anyway? It's not like it even mattered. Squall's spine straightened as he went official.
My motives are irrelevant, sir.
Headmaster Sid chuckled.
Quistis was right. You do have a hard time expressing your feelings.
Next to him, Rinoa tried and failed to cover her laughter at the statement. Squall's eye twitched. What was with this? Why was he being judged right now? And why even bother? They had so many more important things to worry about at the moment. Like everything. All of it was more important than Squall's feelings on any subject.
Sir, please just tell me your plan. We are your seeds and it is our job to serve you. Oh, Squall, I hope you don't seriously believe that,
Sid frowned sadly.
You're not.
He sighed, looking away.
But now's not the time, is it? Very well. Listen up.
Zell and Squall snapped back to attention.
This building was not always a garden. Before I acquired it, it was a shelter. 80 years ago, after the cataclysm that destroyed the Centran civilization, the few remaining people who survived built shelters as places of safety and escapism from the harsh realities of the New World. By the time this one came into my possession, it was barely functional. I found it easier to simply remodel it into the place it is now than try to fix the old mechanisms. However, I was assured by the mechanics at the time that, should I have need of it, the system should still be operational. Here.
Reaching into his pocket, the headmaster pulled out a key that he tossed over. Squall caught it deftly in the air.
Use that key to open the small access panel in the elevator. There you will find the button that will take you down to the MD level. I've been told that, further below the MD level, there is some kind of control system for the shelter this garden used to be. I have never seen it since it was mostly inoperable by the time I got it, so I have no idea what it does. All I do know is that it was used to keep the people here safe when it was a shelter. It may be a small chance, but if it can prove effective against the missiles, then I'm willing to give it a try. That's what I'm betting on.
Squall looked over the tarnished key in his hand with a frown. It was pretty far-fetched. But it was better than nothing. Squall's hand closed around the key and he nodded once.
I understand. I'll find the control system and check it out. Good luck to you,
Sid said, smiling like he was proud of them.
Rinoa,
Squall turned to her.
You get out of here. Evacuate to Balam End. Excuse me.
Rinoa drew back like he had insulted her. Her hands went to her hips and she put her face nearly in his.
Squall Leonhardt, I know you did not just tell me to run away. If this place goes up, then I'm going to be right here, having fought to keep that from happening. Now, come on. We're wasting time. And don't you ever tell me to run again.
She leveled a finger at him before turning and stepping out regally, like a queen. Behind him, Zell and Sid were snickering.
Oh, my boy,
the headmaster lamented with a grin.
You have so much left to learn.
Squall resisted the urge to groan. She was making it so hard to keep his promise about seeing to her safety. Why did the girl have to make everything so damn difficult? Better question, why was he so drawn to the girl that made everything so damn difficult? Squall ran from the headmaster's office, Zell right on his tail. Rinoa was already waiting for him, inside of the elevator as though to prove her point. Squall gave her an even look that she returned as he stepped up to the lock beside the access panel. The key twisted with a little difficulty from disuse, but the panel fell open easily. The old button nestled inside wasn't nearly so pretty as the ones above it leading the various floors of the garden. Squall pressed it as Zell climbed aboard. The door sealed shut and they started dropping.
What do you think it is?
Zell asked.
Maybe like a huge protection spell.
Rinoa guessed.
That would be useful. Or maybe it's a security fence. In which case it's not.
Squall added.
Which is why you should have left. This may be completely pointless. Not listening to you,
Rinoa told him, refusing to let his realistic outlook bring her down. That was when some genius part of the fighting on the first floor decided to attack the generators. The power cut off suddenly, stranding the elevator in mid-air. Zell and Rinoa cried out in surprise as the lights flickered off, leaving only the strip of emergency lights coming up from below. Squall frowned and reached out for the buttons again. They didn't respond.
Great,
Zell threw up his hands.
Now what? Emergency evacuation drills in the event of lost power,
Squall recited like he was reading it off of a pamphlet. As he spoke, he was kneeling down. His fingers reached out and flipped open a tiny hatch on the wall that housed a smaller lever that acted as the non-electronic locking mechanism for the escape hatch on the elevator below their feet. He pushed open the door, revealing a thin, narrow ladder buried into the wall of the elevator's shaft.
All right, Squall,
Rinoa admired brightly.
Nobody's been here for a while,
Squall said, looking at the rust and catching the distinct scent of stagnation from below.
So be careful.
Figuring if it could hold his weight, it could hold any of theirs, Squall put his weight on the rungs of the small ladder first. They were hugging so close to the wall that it was hard to get his fingers around them, and it felt like his feet might slip off. But the metal was sturdy and bore his weight without even groaning in protest. Rinoa started down after him, Zell after her. The three of them moved down the shaft. Squall was scanning as he descended, checking for a place that he could get off. He spotted the exit for the elevator below just as he heard a surge of power.
Shit! Squall!
Zell's call and the grinding of the elevator on its tracks warned him that it was coming back down again. Suddenly, he was quite unhappy by how fast the elevator was. There was no way he was going to make it to the elevator stop. There. Right above the stop was an access tunnel. Squall swung his body inside and ran forward quickly. Right behind him, he heard Rinoa land with a cry before scrambling to her feet and running as well. Zell cried out as he dove within and just barely avoided the elevator slamming into him. Squall stopped and turned back, breathing hard as Rinoa caught up with him. The power returned down here and a harsh yellow light turned on, illuminating a floor hatch at the back of the service tunnel.
That was too close,
Zell grumbled, dusting off his butt as he stood.
Come on,
Squall pointed forward.
Let's just keep going.
The hatch leading down was nearly rusted shut. Squall had to use his foot as leverage against the ground in order to jerk it open. But when it finally gave, it swung open too quickly and slammed against the wall with a loud clang. The scent of oil and dust hit their noses from below. Grimacing, Squall jumped downwards. He stepped out of the way and looked around. Rinoa was right behind him, landing with a small oomph before she moved so Zell could follow. The metal tunnel they were in had a walkway to allow for people to move within it. Below that walkway though, there was a river of thick, black oil moving below them.
An oil stratum,
Squall said while Rinoa covered her nose uncomfortably. A loud, strangely high-pitched growling from below made her shiver.
What was that?
She asked, concerned.
A monster.
Zell blinked.
Down here. Monsters can fester and thrive anywhere if you leave them alone long enough,
Squall quoted from one of his old textbooks.
They're very good at adapting to their environments. In this case, that can work in our favor. If they're able to survive in oil, then they're probably weak against fire. You two have the fire spells. Use them. Right,
Zell beamed.
"'Kay,"
Rinoa said from behind her hand.
"Let's go,"
Squall said, pointing forward. There were metal bars behind them, so there was really only the one direction they could move. He led the way down the oil pipe to a long, open tunnel pointing directly up. The oil broke into two and started flowing away and around the long drop. Squall aimed himself for the ladder at the end of the walkway. It wasn't a long way down. Just a bit too far to jump. Squall moved quickly into the circular bottom of the metal pit. There was a door there. He took it. The control room inside was outdated and covered in a thick layer of dust. The computer system along the wall was all dark and cold. The only other thing inside though was a release valve that just set open along the bottom with an arrow pointing to the side. Squall shrugged and moved towards it. He grabbed the large metal wheel in both hands and gave it an experimental twist. Rust kept it closed tight. All right then. He rotated his shoulders and took tight hold of it again. His muscles shook and strained against the valve. Long set, it was very resistant to being moved from its resting place. Metal started groaning as he grit his teeth. It moved about a millimeter, but it was a hard-fought fraction and it seemed to only get harder to move.
Need some help, man?
Zell asked, already stepping forward. He had barely reached out to grab it when, with a loud groan of protest, the valve finally slipped out of its place. And, as it was being loosened not tightened, it only got easier from there. His wrists aching from the force applied, Squall unscrewed the valve. As he did so, they all heard something loud and heavy moving outside the door.
Macho man,
Rinoa admired with a grin as Squall stepped back.
Meh, that's nothing,
Zell dismissed the feat. Squall ignored them both and stepped outside. Rinoa was right behind him.
Whoa,
she breathed and her voice echoed down the long drop that had opened up below the narrow walkway right outside the door. She knew Headmaster Sid said it was a long way down, but this was more than a little daunting.
Let's go,
Squall told her, fearless as he moved back to the ladder. She groaned but followed loyally, thinking that Squall was lucky he was cute. And strong. And smart. Okay, she would have followed him even if this led down to the pits of hell. Who was she kidding? The base of the ladder, which took forever to reach, ended in a long, zigzagging catwalk. Squall dismounted and started down. Rinoa followed and looked out over the large glass cylinders sticking out from the wall.
What do you reckon those do?
She asked. Zell shrugged, because he honestly had no idea. Squall was already ahead of them and the two moved quickly to catch up. The catwalk ended on a large, circular platform with railing that separated it from more platform. The walls had no other doors. There were no more catwalks. A dead end, Squall frowned as he walked around, looking for something.
Oh, man,
Zell groaned, turning him back to see what he spotted.
Another ladder. We have to climb up again.
Rinoa sighed, rubbing her tired arms.
Where does this one go?
The three of their heads fell back, following the body of the ladder as it moved up. All the way at the top, it connected to yet another catwalk, which zigzagged across the ceiling to a room that was likely another control booth at the far end of the enormous room.
Oh, over there.
Zell said, awed. This place was huge. Squall dropped his head and turned back around to the ladder. Rinoa was looking at him.
Well, Squall?
She asked. Why was he always the one that had to decide? Ugh, whatever. He was getting tired of trying to fight this battle. He looked at the ladder again and frowned. It was rusted and dirty. It didn't look at all stable. He didn't know if he could trust his weight on it, much less all three of their weights. His muscle mass was the heaviest, so he would probably have better luck asking one of the others to go. Rinoa, of course, as the lightest would make the most sense to send up. Yeah, no.
All right,
He let out a breath, stepping forward.
I'll go take a look. You two wait here.
He walked to the base of the ladder and reached out to take hold of it. Immediately, the top layer of the metal flaked apart under his grip. That was a good sign. Gritting his teeth, it's not like he had another choice, Squall started climbing. Rinoa and Zell had to back up quickly as his feet and hands worked off more of the metal and caused it to fall down around them the higher up he went.
Are we sure that's safe?
Rinoa frowned as he continued. Squall, not for the first time, was thankful that he was not afraid of heights. He was just trying to focus on putting one foot in front of the other and work his way up. The higher he went though, the more rusted and dilapidated the ladder became. The near-constant groaning it emitted was far from comforting, and each rung felt more unsteady than the last. He was almost there though. The catwalk was right there. If he could just reach that. The cracking of the heads off of old screws was accompanied by the pained groaning of old metal and assured Squall that he was so not going to make it. The next rung he reached for snapped clean off and his body swung outward as a result. The entire ladder started leaning and, as his weight and the weight of itself fell onto the lower screws, more heads started breaking apart. Squall's mind, racing quickly, looked down to see where the ladder would fall. To try to work out some kind of landing strategy. Hein. He was heading right for the glass window of the control booth. If he broke through that, he didn't know how well his leather would protect his body from being sliced to pieces.
Shiva, Blizzard!
He ordered, throwing out the magic. The glass groaned as it froze over. Squall, to avoid going in head first, twisted himself around the falling ladder and threw his body downwards. His boots slammed into the frozen glass. It shattered rather than splintered, and the shards weren't large enough to slice him to pieces. He skidded to a halt on the far side of the room, his boots kicking up layers of dust and rust from the metal ground below him. Outside, he heard loud groans and echoing crashing as the catwalk, no more stable than the ladder leading to it, fell to pieces. Breathing hard, adrenaline racing through his veins, Squall stood up straight and tried to dust the glass and ice off of the leather of his clothing. He was suddenly fiercely glad he hadn't sent up Rinoa instead. Even if it might not have fallen under her smaller weight, he so did not want to risk this happening to her. He walked over to the window where the body of the ladder had come to rest. He found himself looking out over the entirety of the platform below. He could see a bright blue speck that had run to the railing. Rinoa, coming to see if he had made it out. He didn't know if she'd be able to see the black of his jacket from this height, so he just moved to the control panel. Unlike the last booth, this computer system was still alive. The green screens, ancient technology, were flickering. There was no touch screen here, but the physical controls responded to his touch. The largest, most obvious button, below a diagram of the platform, caught his attention. He grabbed the rounded handle and, after moving it in a few directions experimentally, he found that it twisted and he jerked it around in a circle. The entire area started shaking around him and Squall rushed to the shattered window to see the large, metal area surrounding the platform begin shrinking away. The place continued, if it was possible, even further down. Squall shook his head and finally caught sight of the catwalk. Between that and the ladder being separated from the wall, there was no way he could leave through the door. Which meant that he would have to use the ladder again. Oh, joy! Surprisingly, the trip down was easier than the trip up. Spreading his body across the ladder so his weight wasn't localized in one spot, he had to climb down at an angle. He moved slowly because of that, but the ladder didn't give out from under him. As he reached the bottom, the other two had come back to the ladder. Rinoa had clasped her hands above her heart and Zell was staring as Squall jumped down to the platform.
That was close.
Zell cried.
You all right?
Yeah, Squall said, rotating his shoulder. Rinoa let out a long breath.
Gosh, you scared me. That must be even terrifying.
Nothing new, Squall said immediately, his automatic reaction to sweep it under the rug. Rinoa gave him a dull look.
What?
He frowned at her expression.
Stop being so tough,
she grumbled, crossing her arms.
That's just you getting away with saying I'm fine without actually saying it. Fine, maybe it was a little scary, but who cares? I care. We have bigger things to worry about.
He talked right over her, walking towards the railing.
The missiles still might be on their way and we don't have time for being relieved or scared or whatever.
The blinking light of the exit on the rail told him where to go next. Squall grabbed hold of the handle and jerked it up, unlocking it, then pushed it back. Then another ladder. Hooray! Squall didn't complain verbally as he threw himself over the edge and began climbing down. At least this climb wasn't as long. And, at the bottom, he found himself standing on another platform that was suspended like an island over a lake of gently rippling oil.
It's kinda getting hard to breathe,
Rinoa said, covering her mouth again as she came down off of the ladder.
Are we there yet? Looks like the walkway is blocked.
Zell pointed to a large metal door at the end of the only walkway leading away from the platform. Squall was already moving towards a level placed near the elevator. He took hold of it and threw it sideways without worrying about what might happen. At this point, everything had been fairly intuitive. Whoever designed this place clearly had done it with the intent that anyone should be able to activate the system if they needed it. The door on the end opened and revealed. Wait, another ladder. How far down could this place possibly reach? Squall felt like they should already be digging into the earth at this point. He was suddenly very glad that he hadn't allowed his aging headmaster to come this way instead. The three of them started running towards the end of the walkway. Bubbling of the oil to his left caught Squall's attention. He didn't have time to do more than cry out a warning before the monsters burst out of the lake of oil in an explosion of black liquid that showered down on them as first one, then another launched itself from the dark below. Slightly globular, with tiny, scraping tentacles that wiggled at the end of the limb pods they possessed, the ugly monsters were totally blind but sniffed at them using long, narrow tubes that protruded from what Squall imagined was their face. They looked somehow slimy and didn't so much walk as they wiggled in place.
Gross.
Rinoa drew back.
They look like worms. But worse. We have to hurry.
Squall growled, drawing his blade.
You two, light them up. But be careful not to hit the oil. Fire!
Rinoa and Zell yelled at the same time, throwing out their magic. Both oily monsters caught fire easily and screamed, literally screamed, in pain as it burned through their thin, flammable skin. Squall ran forward as the spells burned out, so as not to catch the rest of the oil on fire, and brought down his sword into the head of the one on the left. Its brain, however, was not where he had guessed, and it kept wriggling as Squall balanced on its back.
Gross.
Rinoa reiterated, taking aim. She fired, and the Valkyrie sang through the air. It sliced neatly through the monster's face, and thick, purplish blood came oozing out like petroleum jelly. Squall twisted and planted his boot. Growling with the effort it took, he sliced downward along the monster's back. More incredibly viscous blood pushed out, it didn't drip at all. Squall jerked back and slammed the gun blade down. He pulled the trigger, and a burst of ice sliced through the monster's internal organs. The monster started slowing down.
Flaming fists, baby!
Zell yelled in delight, pounding his fists together and sending sparks flying before he charged. Keeping careful control over the flames to prevent them from spreading, he started slamming his fist against the oil monster. Small, localized, deep burns burst against its flesh where Zell punched, and the thing drew back in pain.
Diablos! Fire on my blade!
Rinoa ordered, taking aim again. The tip of the Valkyrie burst to life with blue flames as she hit the trigger. The Valkyrie zoomed down the monster's back and across its tail. Bright blue fire burned hotly through its flesh, catching easily on the thing's blood. Zell, unaffected by the hottest of flames, charged in and slammed his fist through the thing's back. The rudimentary heart that the monsters possessed was three-chambered, small, and thick. It had to be to pump that thick blood. Zell caught it in and squeezed just as Squall's random piercing found the target in his monster. Both oil creatures let out long, bubbling noises as they collapsed down. Their bodies looked like they melted somewhat as they lost the power to keep them upright.
Ew!
Rinoa gagged, stepping away as Squall came down. He was covered in the thick, purple, petroleum jelly like blood.
You are not allowed to touch me again until you wash that stuff off. I don't want to touch anything until I wash it off,
Squall admitted, trying to flick it away. It clung tightly to his skin and leather. Zell laughed as the flames engulfing his body burned away the blood, while Ifrit left Zell and his clothing completely untouched.
Jealous?
He asked, grinning smugly. Squall raised an eyebrow as Shiva reached out and froze the blood soaked onto him. He lifted his foot and slammed it down against the ground. The force of it shattered the frozen blood and it fell around him in glittered shards.
No,
he said, putting his gun blade away.
Come on.
The missiles could be coming any minute now. How he hoped desperately that he was wrong and Selphie had been successful. They raced for the next ladder. Racing out over the ocean, leaving a long trail of smoke in their wake, the missiles aiming for Balam sank down from under the clouds and raced toward the ground. The program fighting against the increased error ratio focused on their rather large target. The final ladder ended in a strangely spherical room that echoed uncomfortably in their ears as they walked forward. The large, foreign engine sitting, waiting, for them was enormous. The platform leading to it was rusted and held only a single, simple control panel.
Looks like we're here,
Squall whispered. His voice still echoed.
So? What are we supposed to do here?
Rinoa asked, looking around. How in the name of Hein was he supposed to know? Squall thought resentfully as he stepped up to the controls. Even the headmaster didn't know. Well, there was a strange control stick. He reached out and clicked it sideways. Nothing. The entire room was deadly silent. He clicked it again. More nothing.
Do you know what you're doing, Squall?
Rinoa asked, grabbing her arm. Of all the stupid, of course he didn't.
What else can I do?
He asked almost angrily, turning from the console. The ground dropped down under their feet as something loud clanged somewhere outside or inside of the room. It was hard to tell where it came from with the horrid echo. But the room was shaking and the three of them swayed, trying to maintain their balance. The screens on the console blinked to life first as electricity started sparking from the large machine in front of them. Squall flinched because the memories of his torture was too fresh. But he was able to look past that automatic response and turn around, trying to follow what was going on. The large machines in front of him that Squall could make neither heads nor tails of started spinning, slowly rotating around the centers. Then, as Squall watched, around each other, he heard something heavy thud underneath him and the platform dropped. It was only a few centimeters, but the sudden stop made all three of them hit their knees. Then, groaning like an old man trying to get out of bed, the platform started raising. Squall pushed himself up quickly and watched as the machinery, spinning dizzily fast now, sank beneath them.
Squall, the ceiling!
Rinoa pointed. He turned to run back, but the walkway to the ladder out of here was far below them. They were moving too fast now. The ceiling was rushing right at them. The strange weightlessness that came over him told Squall that there was magic being cast all over the platform. But he didn't know the spell. Light washed over their bodies. Rinoa cried out as her belly dropped out from under her and the platform burst through a hole in the roof of the engine room that opened barely in time for them to pass. Straight up they flew. Ancient machinery and rusted metal flashing by them too quickly to identify. The green lights on the old screens of the control panel were their only lights as they raced upwards. The shaft ended in another dead end and Zell cursed at seeing it rushing at them. It had to open soon, right? Right.
Brace for impact!
Squall yelled. The roof of the shaft opened, not by mechanics, but by magic. With a flash of light, they passed through with a strange, cooling sensation. Almost like chewing on mint gum. The brightness of daylight surrounding them, the fresh air of the third-floor office hit them hard. Not nearly as hard as the platform hitting Headmaster Sid. The old man cried out in surprise as a burst of light from the floor of his office sudden bloomed into an old metal platform. His bad knee buckled under him and he landed hard on his rear as the platform burst upwards, reaching high above the common area of his office. Looking out over the headmaster's suite, giving an almost dizzying view of their surroundings. The platform jerked to a halt. It dropped back down only slightly as something heavy and metal snapped into place, locking the platform in the sky.
Squall!
The headmaster gasped, eyes wide. The Seed was already getting back to his feet, casting his gaze around. He could still hear machinery grinding and groaning to life. And he could still feel magic, like a cloud, thick in the air around him. The bright ring of light and metal that had always floated above the garden had been, for many years, a source of mystery and beauty. No one knew what it was for. No one could even figure out what was holding it up there. Perfectly stationary, glittering from unknown metals and magic. As Squall and the others looked around, directly above their heads, they could see the metal ring starting to glow. Starting to slowly spin. The long golden spokes spun counterclockwise. Sandwiched between those two layers, the ornate white and silver piece spun clockwise. Countering each other. Building energy. It started coming down on their heads. The bright light it created, white and blue and blinding, got impossibly brighter, seemingly darkening the sky behind it in comparison. Squall panicked for a moment. That ring was too small. There was no way it would fit over the entirety of the garden. It was going to crash down around their heads. The technology was too old, left without maintenance for too long. The light and the ring hit them at the same time. While the ring slipped easily over the apex of the garden where the headmaster's suite resided, the light washed over everything. Squall heard an almost uncomfortable groaning, bending, warping of metal, glass, and wood. The ring hit the garden somewhere below them, but it didn't crash against the hull. It slipped through. From directly above, looking down through the windows that offered a 360-degree view in almost all directions, Squall could see that the ring and the light weren't doing any damage at all. But they were leaving the garden. Changed somehow. He could feel the floor sinking. Then raising. The ring hit the ground beneath the garden. The loud snapping of concrete, bedrock, and the explosion of dirt as the ring dug its spokes into the earth was immediately followed by an enormous cloud of dust and dirt that burst up from below. The ring continued to spin. The dirt spun with it, creating a vortex. A loud beeping on the control panel caught Squall's attention.
No way!
Zell was yelling at everything as Squall tried to decipher what the frantic beeping meant. Rinoa, squinting through the window, understood first. The long tracks being left over the ocean. The flashing of metal as they raced towards them. Squall! She yelled, grabbing his jacket sleeve. Her arm, frantic in its fear, smacked against the strange control stick on the control panel.
Missiles incoming!
He roared in warning. What had they even accomplished here? Was it enough? There was a delay between control panel and the engine below. Rinoa's arm on the console registered with it seconds later. And the garden gave a lurch. They all three looked up as the shining bodies of the missiles jerked upwards, the smoke trail encasing them almost like a cage. They turned, and zoomed back to deliver their fatal cargo. The large windows gave a perfect view, and Squall turned as he watched the missiles zoom directly past them. No, not just the missiles. The garden, it was. It was moving. Squall covered his face as the missiles struck. The bright, blinding light, not the first they had seen in the last minute, nearly blinded him. He heard the sound of more rock and stone being crushed and pulverized. The dust around them got, if possible, thicker. A second later, the shock wave from the blast hit the garden. Rinoa hit the ground. Zell was thrown against the rail. Headmaster Sid, still on his butt, rocked uncomfortably but kept himself up. Squall was thrown backwards. His elbow hit the control panel and the lever. As the garden rocked from the force of the blast, the delay passed, and the garden suddenly zoomed forward. They burst out of the dark dust cloud and into the bright light of day. The garden was moving. And it was moving fast. The enormous building. No. The enormous vessel was eating up land faster than any car Squall had driven.
We're moving.
Squall gasped. What in the name of Holy Hine?
I see.
Sid breathed, trying to gather himself. Shaking his head, he stood up slowly.
So this is the secret. I could see how this would prove beneficial in the aftermath of the cataclysm. Holy Hine!
Rinoa breathed, still trying to drink it all in.
Hiluvaton better than a protection spell,
Zell laughed, craning his neck around to try to stare at the familiar scenery observed from an entirely new angle.
The garden?
Sid frowned, looking back and down towards the door of his office.
What's going on outside? Are the students safe? Come on, Squall.
Laughing like a kid, Rinoa grabbed his arm and began pulling him quickly towards the platform at the back of the deck. The only part that looked like it moved.
Let's go. I want to see. Yeah.
Zell agreed.
How do you work this thing?
Letting Rinoa lead him, Squall stepped onto the small platform. He looked around for some way to activate it. Rinoa found it first. There was a small pedal near the far right corner. She pressed it with her foot eagerly and the platform started moving down. They took the elevator down to the second story. As they got out, the first thing they saw was a man running in frantic circles, crying out in surprise. Another man was staring out over the rails of the second-story walkway. At least they weren't fighting. Squall ran past them to the second-floor halls. In front of the classroom, Seeds and cadets alike were standing around, talking quickly. Did the hallway look different? Either way, none of the students seemed to be negatively affected. The safety system hadn't harmed anyone when it was activated. Just changed everything. They jogged down through the hall, through more people that had laid down their weapons in exchange for looking at each other and trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. At the far end of the hallway, past the emergency exit, there was a door that led to the second-floor observation deck. No one had ever used it for anything because, really, the only thing it had ever observed was the mountains directly behind the garden. At least that was the mystery solved of why anyone would point an observation desk at a wall of boring rocks. They hadn't. The small staircase up to the observation deck was only wide enough for one. Squall went up first and slowed to a halt as the sunlight hit him. Rinoa, however, ran past him. Throwing out her arms, laughing, she raced for the metal railing. Birds were calling out over the garden. Rather than being frightened away by the explosion and the suddenly no longer stationary garden, they were flying alongside it. Squall continued forward calmly as Zell laughed loudly and ran to look down at the ring, which was now directly below them. Its magic keeping the garden afloat between its circular body. Rinoa leaned out slightly over the edge. The wind rushed through her hair. She took a deep breath of the fresh air, trying to banish any lingering scent of oil that remained in her nose. She heard Squall's footsteps approaching behind her and she turned. Her face was flushed with excitement. The wind was scooping up her hair and playing with the jet black locks. It was also pushing against her clothes, molding them to the shape of her body. The light surrounded her like a halo. She beamed at him, leaning back against the railing slightly. Squall almost felt like she was offering her body up to him. See? She laughed.
Wasn't I right?
Squall lifted an eyebrow curiously. About what? Because she certainly hadn't predicted the garden being able to move.
If I had evacuated to Balam, you would be up here alone without me,
she clarified.
And then how would you feel? I would feel like you hadn't come within inches of death because the missiles barely avoided hitting us,
he said immediately, totally serious. Rinoa threw back her head and laughed.
Ah, who cares? We survived, right? And you don't get to feel this alive without coming within inches of death.
What was she talking about? Her head fell back and she smiled at him invitingly.
Come here. Come look at the view. I can see it just fine from here.
She grinned. Then, unable to stop herself from teasing him just a little, she ran one of her fingers up from her thigh, across her belly, around the swell of her breast, then up into her hair. Squall's eyes tracked the entire movement and made her grin.
Oh, but, the only thing you can see is me.
The only thing he attempted to look at was her. Her voice sounded completely innocent, like she was merely blocking his vision, yet the inference couldn't be missed. Squall made a face before he stepped forward. He tore his eyes away from her body and looked out, mostly just to prove a point. Beside him, Rinoa laughed as she turned. She wasn't really trying to look at anything but him either. His hair, so unexpectedly soft, was billowing in the wind. His skin, tanned and hard, looked right at home under the sun. The bright lights of outdoors highlighted what he was always trying to downplay with the black leather. The natural highlights in his hair. The brightness of his skin. He was so unreasonably attractive, even with the scar, it took Rinoa's breath away slightly. He caught sight of her staring out of the corner of his eye and turned to her. Instead of quickly looking away, Rinoa continued looking at him. His eyes, always so serious, always on, felt like they were looking right through to her soul. But unjudging. Accepting. Like he had seen the depths of human misery, pain, and darkness, and nothing she held inside her could close to compare. She felt like she could stay up there for hours more, staring at Squall while he stared at her. Neither speaking, but so much being passed between them. Until Zell, who she had honestly forgotten was out here with them, spoke up.
Hey, guys! Let's go check out the first floor,
he said, moving towards the door again. Squall nodded once, stared for just another second more, then turned away. Slightly disappointed, when would they ever get a chance to be alone? She followed him back down into the second-floor hallway. They had barely hit the ground inside when they heard Sue calling out. She was racing towards them, a frightened look on her face.
Squall! It's the headmaster!
She jerked to a halt and waved him back.
Get back to the bridge on the double!
They sprinted back to the office. The same button that lowered the lift rose it back to the deck. The headmaster was there, dithering over the control panel. He turned quickly when he heard them coming up.
Squall!
He pointed, moving out of the way.
The controls aren't responding. I don't know what to do. We're going to crash into the town of Balam if we don't do something. No way!
Rinoa turned back as Squall cursed internally.
Can't we do something? Man!
Zell breathed, running to the window and looking out over the beachside town that they were quickly bearing down on.
This can't be happening. Squall, can you think of anything?
Sid asked desperately. No.
Squall, come on!
Zell yelled, waving him towards the controls without doing anything himself.
Squall, do something!
Rinoa begged expectantly. How the hell should he know what to do? They were all staring at him. The town was coming up fast.
Damn!
He yelled loudly, running to the controls. For lack of anything better to do, he just started hitting everything. Buttons, levers, the control panel itself. It started making weird noises in protest at the incoming signals, but Squall just kept beating away at it. The wires that carried signals down to the engines were corroded and worn. They delayed signal transmission and, with the sudden activation at the system, were dying quickly. But, at Squall's banging, they gave one last cough of life and the garden lurched.
Whoa! What was that?
Zell yelled as Rinoa took hold of the rails to keep from falling. The headmaster, breathing hard, looked out of the window. A bright smile crossed his face.
Yes. You did it. We're turning.
The town of VIII, so peaceful and quiet, panicked at seeing the large, once immobile garden bearing down on them. The wind generated by the spinning ring whipped through the town, sending hair and leaves and whatever else that wasn't tied down flying. But the garden was turning. It passed within centimeters of hitting the wall outside the town.
All right, Squall!
Rinoa yelled, jumping in place.
You did it!
Squall let out a breath, leaning against the control panel.
Ah!
Zell yelled, pointing.
Yeah, but now we're going to crash into the sea. Everybody, hold on to something!
Headmaster Sid yelled, reaching back for the rails. Zell was already clinging onto them. Squall gripped the control panel. Rinoa rushed forward and grabbed onto Squall's arm. The water rushed towards them. Squall turned his arm quickly and took proper hold of Rinoa's shoulders, bringing her in close to keep her from falling. The waves crashed against the base of the garden as it fell from the short cliff. The garden didn't wobble or tilt. The ring around its base acted almost like a gyroscope and kept the garden perfectly level as it drove forward and down. The engines creaked and groaned and sputtered as they slammed into the surf. The body of the garden crashed and they all jerked forward as they touched down. But the garden didn't sink. The massive wave they created by displacing so much water washed over the pier of VIII, but the town had experienced worse during bad storms. The engines gave one last cough before the control panel in front of Squall suddenly darkened and everything died. The garden, still coasting on its own momentum, continued drifting out into the open water. The control deck remained completely still as everyone tried to take a breath. As they waited to see if the massive garden was going to start dropping under the waves. But the ring, whatever it was, kept them floating just above the base of the garden. The magic ring, independent of the mechanical controls, remained completely functional. Headmaster Sid broke the silence first as he let out a long sigh of relief. Zell started laughing nervously and Rinoa's entire body slumped against Squall as all her muscles relaxed at the same time. He realized that he was still holding her and he jerked his arm back quickly. She didn't miss the move but she smiled at him nonetheless.
Squall, Zell, Rinoa,
Headmaster Sid called to them, turning their gaze away from the window. He nodded to each of them in turn.
A job very well done. I couldn't ask for better. I think the worst is behind us for now. Where are we heading?
Squall asked, glancing back out the window. Nothing but open water stretched out in front of them. Headmaster Sid shrugged.
I guess we'll just drift along for the time being. Until we figure out how to fix and maneuver the garden. There shouldn't be any major towns out here.
He laughed.
So I think we can finally relax for a while. Clean up this mess we've made. And spend some time considering what to do next.
He smiled at them good-naturedly as they looked back at him. Squall immediately felt better with that list of things to do. As crazy as it was right now, a to-do list of simple, easy things to check off was a blessing. Headmaster Sid laughed.
So much for my room, eh? Where am I going to change now?
Rinoa and Zell laughed with him as Squall shook his head in disbelief. How could he be so calm? End of chapter.